It's Drybear. We need to talk about the healer rankings for Season 3, Week number 1, as there's been some shakeups that's pretty different from what we saw last season and the season before. Primarily that Mistweavers are actually on the top right now. I think it's been a very long time since we see Mistweavers do this well compared to their counterparts in most styles of content. Now, a lot of this is true in raid settings in general. Their raid throughput and raid healing is actually bonkers right now, and they're doing exceptionally well. They do still get outperformed in Mythic Plus by a few other specs, but in general, their healing is probably the best it's been in a long time, which is great news for Mistweaver mains, as it's about dang time they got some boost. Although granted, towards the end of Season 1, start of Season 2, they did get a lot of buffs that helped them move them into this position. Now, when it comes to Mythic Plus, Discipline Priest and Holy Paladin are taking the cake by far. They're doing so insanely well in this week of Mythic Plus, and I think there's a good reason for that. There's actually not that many skips in this set of dungeons. In fact, most of the dungeons, aside from the new Dawn of the Infinite dungeons, have more or less the count that you need. Darkheart Thicket has a couple skips. You might need some skips in the new dungeon, but the other 5 or 4 of them are pretty straightforward, and you just need good HPS. Not only do Discipline and Holy Paladin have those in droves, they also have a ton of damage reduction, which helps with some of the tank busters that you get in some of the boss fights. The Gohan, Bubble, Pain Suppression, the Blessing of Sacrifice, all of these come in clutch, as well as having big burst heals that come in single target as well. Next for Mythic Plus is the Preservation Evoker, and they have been holding this spot for quite a while. They were easily the best healer in the game in Season 1, and they were in the top 3 most of Season 2, and they're holding that spot for Season 3. And this is the only place that you really see Mistweaver fall down, as they are kind of dominating in the other 2 categories. Mistweaver in the 4th slot for Mythic Plus, and then Resto Druid and Resto Shaman about the same when it comes to being the bottom third, bottom half of Mythic Plus healers. Their throughput is still very strong, but it's not really as strong as some of the other classes here, and this is pretty surprising for Restoration Druid, as we typically see Preservation Evoker, Discipline Priest, and Restoration Druid dominate Mythic Plus at the very beginning of the season, so seeing Resto Druid this low this early is kind of concerning. Resto Shaman towards the bottom of Mythic Plus specifically, and I think this is just a cooldown issue. It's a emergency throughput issue. In general, they have great healing. All the changes that they got to chain heal in 10.1, 10.15, all of those, I think there's a lot of really good bursts options for them, but outside of having a good cloud burst or having a big long cooldown up like SLT or something like that, if the whole group drops in an instant and you need to do something about it, Resto Druid can struggle, or Resto Shaman can struggle to keep up with that kind of situation. And last for Mythic Plus is Holy Priest, which to me is a little surprising. I think Holy Priest is actually a little down and out right now. They're not even topping the charts for Raid, Mythic, or Heroic in general. They are still being brought to Mythic Raid, but they're doing similar to Holy Paladin, even though they would be considered a Raid healer and Holy Paladin's more of a spot healer. Them doing the same throughput is a bit weird. Not to mention, unlike Discipline Priest, Holy Priest has troubles keeping themselves alive and being able to endure lots of AoE damage or single target bursts because they don't have as much damage reduction outright. Then we dive into Raid. Heroic Raid is where we get most of the general sense of how the class itself is performing and if it's pushed to its limits, what it can do. And in general, most of the classes are about the same, but you can see that Mistweaver, Restoration Shaman, Preservation Evoker, and Disc Priest are kind of in an echelon of their own, with Mistweaver being up at the top and the other 3 kind of being near each other. And then towards the bottom, a bit of a drop off from the other 4 is Resto Druid, Holy Priest, and Holy Paladin. And I've said this every single time, and I will continue to say it. Holy Paladin can be at the bottom of the healing throughput for large group content, and they will still be brought because they bring far more than just throughput, and what they excel at far more than any other healer in the entire game is spot healing and tank healing. You really need Holy Paladins that if one person drops to 10% and there's raid damage going out at the same time, if all you have is raid healers, that one person might actually die, and and that's what spot healing is for. That Holy Paladin can then burst that one person up to a reasonable level, while the raid healers focus on getting everyone up together all in one go. And so having that Holy Paladin, even though that when things are pushed together and you have lots of raid healers in the group, their HPS drops, they still bring far more utility than any raid healer would in that specific role. So that's kind of what scares me about Resto Druid and Holy Priest being so far down, is I would consider both Resto Druid and Holy Priest raid healers, the throughput HPS healers that focus on just getting lots of heals out. Other than like an Innervate or a Divine Hymn, you're not getting a crazy amount of utility out of those two. You really just want them for overall raid healing to keep your raid alive. So if we see Resto Druid and Holy Priest towards the bottom here, it doesn't really bode well for their initial launch into Season 3. Now, when we go into Mythic, we do see a little bit of shift up here. Discipline jumps up a bit. Mistweaver's still at the top for throughput, and we are seeing Preservation drop down some as well, which does tell me that there are some differences in the skill floor for some of these classes, and also how they're being utilized in the Race to World First, like pushing Mythic raid as high as it can go. And I'm very encouraged to see Resto Shaman performing better in Mythic raid than they do in Heroic raid, just for the sheer fact that it does mean that if you put a lot of really well-timed cloudbursts out and you're planning out your chain heals and you're using your procs properly and you're targeting the right person with your chain heal so that Mastery can scale it up as high as possible, you would want to see Resto Shaman here. And keep in mind that the Resto Shaman Mastery is built for progression. Resto Shamans are always going to be the strongest healers of the strongest versions of themselves at the beginning of the tier, when everyone is taking more damage and screwing up mechanics more often, because they do more healing based on how low people are. And so you would want to see them towards the top end at the beginning of the season, as other classes may start to overtake them later based on their just core game design. And you have the similar spread towards the bottom here for Mythic Raid. Resto Druid, Holy Priest, Holy Paladin at the bottom. And again, Holy Paladin could be very low here and it's still going to be brought because they're so insanely good. So I think the big takeaway here for Raid specifically, and even Mythic Plus, is that Holy Priest and the Restoration Druid are the two specs to look at right now that I would like to see for a buff. Just looking at the data and the spread and the logs for where everything is, I don't think Holy Priests or Resto Druids are healing enough for their role and their contribution in the group. Also keep in mind that the Race to the World First is still going on. 7 out of 9 is where we're at for the clear of a Mirdrasil, so check that out. I'll leave some links in the description and in the comments for you as well. And let me know what you think about the spread for the healers this week, Season 3, Week 1 for the healers in general, and what you expect to see going into the next few weeks for WoW. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.